This is the Classic Business Law Feature.
Well, written submissions have opened on the draft bill to amend Section 25 of the Constitution. That's the one that deals with expropriation of land without compensation, EWC, which is an issue that has almost become, well, shall we say, drowned out or blackened by the load shedding issue at Eskom. Written submissions have to reach the committee by the 31st of this month, so you've still got a couple of weeks to talk about some of the challenges that remain that certainly can't be fixed through just amending Section 25. I'm joined now by Peter Setou, who's the Chief Executive of the Vumelana Advisory Fund. It's a non-profit organisation that was formed in 2012 to help beneficiaries of the land reform program actually put their land to profitable use by establishing commercially viable partnerships between communities and investors and fill that knowledge gap which has been so critical in successful land reform. Evening, Peter.
Good evening to you and your listeners.
Just bring us up to speed on where we are in the whole process to amend the Constitution to effect land reform. What does this bill mean?
Well, we now know that around December, around the 17th of December, the Parliamentary Ad hoc Committee, which was appointed to introduce legislation amending Section 25, has published a draft bill and called for written submission to reach the committee by 31st of January. And from our side, as Vumelana being a public benefit organization, based on our experience in the land reform space, we've really been encouraging South Africans more generally to engage with this process and where they possibly can to make submissions and inputs and become part of this process, as it were.
And if you read through the bill, on the one hand, the draft explicitly limits the possibility of nil compensation to land and improvements thereon when they are to be expropriated for the purposes of land reform. What does the property rights section say about property being limited to land? Because there was a lot of fear that this was being drafted in such a way so as to include assets like intellectual property or cash or art or vehicles or computers even. This seems now to have been more clearly defined.
Yes. I mean, one really needs to look at the preamble of this draft bill as well as the memorandum on the objects of the bill, which really makes it very clear what the intention of this bill is. It really says it, but it's a relatively short draft bill if you look at it. It does one or two things. One, it's intended to really make explicit, that which is implicit in the Constitution with regards to expropriation of land without compensation as a legitimate option for land reform, so as to address the historic wrongs caused by arbitrary dispossession of land. So if you look at the amendment, really, it is focusing on land reform. That's the one thing. So it does not really refer to all forms of property at this stage. At least that's what's provided for in the bill. Secondly, it also makes it very clear that this will be a court-sanctioned process, meaning the court is the one which can actually make such a determination. So that is the second thing. The last thing that one needs to really highlight is the fact that one provision of this draft bill is that national legislation must be developed to really highlight or set out those specific circumstances where a court may determine that the amount for compensation is nil. So, if you like, once this draft amendment bill has gone through the constitutional process, through the parliamentary process, there will still be a need to develop and finalize expropriation legislation which really sets out those specific circumstances. So it is for that reason that we are saying it is important for South Africans to really engage with this process. We are also saying, whilst it is equally important to make sure that we engage with this process, it is equally important to urgently address the current challenges that are really besetting the land reform space and accept that most of these challenges will not necessarily be addressed through a constitutional amendment. The challenges faced by the current beneficiaries of land reform must be addressed, since if we fail to do this, we can only compound the problem as and when more land gets acquired.
Peter, what are those major challenges? And just from the outside looking in, one can understand how a community acquiring a piece of land through land restitution or a government process would perhaps struggle to turn that land to economic use without having the skills, the access to capital, all of those things that are required to ensure that these things are done successfully and sustainably. What do you see as the major challenges?
Well, I think you are spot on in terms of what the real challenges are. And I mean, there's a lot of information out there. The Motlanthe Commission, or the high-level panel report, spells out what those challenges are, including coming up with some suggestions around what is it that needs to be done. And recently, the Presidential Advisory Panel also highlighted some of the problems. But I mean, if I can just highlight a few, and what we believe really needs to be done is there is a need to really make sure that we balance the manner in which land is acquired and used. The debate on land expropriation without compensation has somewhat reduced the land reform question to one of acquisition, as it were. It is important that when we address these questions, we also need to answer what really happens to the land once it's acquired and transferred, because this really for us remains largely ignored. We're at a point when the land is transferred to the community. A lot of times they don't have the expertise, or for that matter, they don't have the requisite capacity, including finance, access to finance to really work the land. So it is important that we put in place post-settlement support in place to make sure that at the point when the land is transferred, then communities or beneficiaries of land reform could be supported so that they could use this land productively, as it were. Because unfortunately, what has happened thus far is at a point when the land is transferred, you will find that the current owners would obviously be vacating the land, and a lot of times people end up losing jobs, etc., and the land just goes to waste. For us, that needs to be addressed. The restitution process, in our view, needs to be streamlined, and for us, really two areas require urgent attention. During the first round of the land claims, the majority of the claims were settled through financial compensation. So it is highly likely that this may well be the case once the new window is reopened. So we are saying that if this process can be speedily and fairly completed, a large portion of restitution claims can be finalized, as opposed to what we've observed, where it actually takes a bit longer. On the other hand, we are also
provided there's budget, Peter, because that's also been a big challenge here. The fact that there hasn't been the budgetary resources in order to settle the claimants financially.
Absolutely. I mean, you are addressing an important point. And having said that, I think as a country and as South Africans, particularly given the state of our economy, it is equally important to start looking at innovative mechanisms through which land reform could be financed. I mean, we know that there's a huge demand on public resources, and the demand exceeds available funds. So there's an urgent need, in our view, to look at how to unlock innovative financing of land acquisition for land reform purposes, particularly in respect of high-value land parcels. And I think this is a separate debate that we can engage on.
Absolutely, which I'm going to invite you back on to have when we have a little bit more time, Peter, when we have a 30-minute panel. But I must thank you for your time and for giving us the latest on where we are on this road to amending the Constitution in Section 25 to allow for the express circumstances under which land can be expropriated without compensation. That was Peter Setou, Chief Executive of the Vumelana Advisory Fund.